Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is June 3rd, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the transfer portal. There was a new rule that was put into place that would give guys like Cam Rising and Brew McCoy one more year to figure out what they want to do at the next level and possibly build out that resume a little bit more. Then we'll get into one of the most popular guys at the SEC meetings last week, Jimmy Sexton, one of the most powerful people in college football. If you don't know the name, you definitely should, and we'll get into why that is so important here in the second segment. Then we'll talk about Texas a little bit. We got into why Oklahoma, I think, is sort of ready for the SEC, might need a couple of years to get really fully involved, but Texas seems like they're ready to roll. But are they fully ready? We'll figure out in the third segment here today. And then we have a little bit of a recruiting update. We're coming off a huge weekend with a ton of official visits that I want to break down for all of you. And then we got a Good Vibes Monday to finish it off. And we're going to talk about some of the players that have a ton to gain from this year, especially in the NFL level. Definitely a lot of guys that can make a ton of money. No two ways about it. So we'll definitely break that down towards the end. Before we jump in, though, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have kind of a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's good for all of us. But let's jump right in and let's talk about this new transfer portal rule because it's a little bit wild. No two ways about it. We talked about all of the different changes that are going on and how some of the NCAA rules that have been in place are not necessarily as ironclad as they would like them to be, and this is one of them. So it sounds like double transfers are going to be able to, at least if you are a double transfer where you had to sit out a season, it looks like you're going to get that season back. It sounds like in one of the court of laws, I believe, the United States Department of Justice actually ruled that this was not a rule that they could enforce and something that absolutely had to be given back to the athletes. So guys like Cam Rising, guys like Brew McCoy, we'll get into all of those and break down why it's such a big deal for them. But this is obviously a really, really huge thing. It's something that a lot of people in college football, fans and coaches included, are a little bit perturbed by, people being able to stay until they're 25, 26 and be, real veterans in college football is obviously kind of a new phenomenon with COVID years and medical red shirts and all of the different things that have happened over the last couple of years. But it is one of those things that gives all these guys kind of a second shot. Most of the guys that I'm about to talk about have definitely, struggled with a lot of injuries, with, transferring to a new school and having to sit out when they really wanted to play. So a lot of this is, a good thing for those players, but it is another, I suppose, indicator of where the NCAA was at a couple of years ago. And it was essentially they were in catch-up mode, and they absolutely shouldn't have been, but that's the place they were in. We added NIL into the conversation. We've talked about it pretty much ad nauseum at this point that it could have been set up in a place where NIL was brought into the picture and we didn't have this remarkable turmoil around the sport. Now, we were going to have things change. We were going to have kind of interesting, awkward conversations, no doubt about that. But I think there was a way to make it at least a little bit more seamless than it was, which it was not seamless by any means. And I think the transfer portal is kind of the same way. They were not prepared for the full onslaught that was going to happen after some of the rules changed, and it happened very quickly. And I think it's one of those things where if the NCAA was 2-3 years ahead of this and started to plan for the eventuality of once you start giving players some rights, once you start giving players NIL money and different things to earn, they're going to start utilizing that. And some of that comes in the form of them moving schools pretty often. So I think this is, another moniker of the NCAA is not necessarily the entity that you want it to be right now. And it wasn't a couple of years ago. And right now, they're just playing catch up and dealing with lawsuits and all of the fallout of some things that they could have prevented in a lot of ways. So this is obviously going to be a fascinating rule, but let's break down some of the guys that are going to benefit the most from this rule. Will Backus over at CBS broke down a couple of big-time guys, and I'm sure more and more will start to come out of the woodwork because, as we know in college football, there's always a couple of guys that kind of pop up out of nowhere and make a real big name for themselves. So we'll definitely break those guys down as we get there, but I do want to start with Cam Rising. He feels like the obvious answer here. He feels like the guy that I think has the most to gain. There's no two ways about that. He obviously suffered a number of injuries throughout his career, kept him out all of last season with a bad injury that it felt like we were all just kind of waiting for the news that he was going to start that day, and it just never came. So, obviously, a terrible situation for him, but way back in the day, he transferred over from Texas after his freshman year and had to sit a year, and that obviously is something that he's going to get that year back now. And we saw Michael Penix. We've seen that NFL teams can absolutely overlook some health issues in the past, but you have to show them that you can be healthy for an extended period of time. If for Michael Penix, it was 2 years. For Cam Rising, it could be 2 years as well, starting this year and then the following. So he's one of those guys that, is a very, very good game manager, is very smart on the football field, can do a lot of really, really incredible things. So I don't necessarily think it's crazy to think that, say he comes back for the next 2 years. They win the Big 12 both those years. They go to the playoff. He's the leader of that, charge and does really incredible things. I'm not saying he's going to be, a first-round pick or anything crazy like that, but there's definitely NFL teams that would take a, flyer on him and give him a shot to succeed at the next level, because I think this is a very talented kid that just has gotten clipped at pretty much every turn where he was really starting to heat up. So I'm really excited to see what he can do for these next 2 years. I like to think that he'll probably stick around after 2024, barring some remarkable season from him, which is on the table, but definitely someone that benefits from this a lot. One guy that I think is really interesting in all of this is Brew McCoy. He has had one of the most fascinating college careers in quite some time. He committed to USC in high school and was committed to them for quite some time. Decommitted very shortly before signing day. Decided to sign with Texas. He was in Austin for about the length of a lunch, and then decided to make his way back to USC for a year before transferring to Tennessee. And he's been at Tennessee for a couple of years. He had to sit out 1 year. He's had some injury troubles throughout his career, but this is a big body, physical receiver, a guy that can block on the outside, a guy that can do the jump balls. Is a competent route runner, but not necessarily the strongest thing in his tool chest. But at the end of the day, a very, very physical receiver that has an NFL body. So when you look at him, if he can get it going this year and be a big piece of that offense with Nico Iamaleava, and then with some of the guys that are going to walk out the door, I assume Squirrel White will likely put his name into the NFL draft after this year. He's going to be an even bigger part in 2025, and I think that's really where you could see him kind of shoot up those boards, especially because that's when you'll have Iamaleava in his sophomore, or in his second year starting, that is, and he'll be a little bit more comfortable, and that offense could be incredibly potent with Brew McCoy right at the center of it. So very fascinating to watch this kid. I think the talent is off the charts. It's just a matter of him staying healthy, being on the field, and showing what his ability is. But another wide receiver here that is a little bit interesting. He's been kind of off the beaten path for a little bit here, where this is someone that came into Texas originally out of high school and had a really good freshman year. He was a fantastic player for them, might have been the best wide receiver on that team, maybe second to Devin Duvernay when they had Sam Ehlinger, and that was quite some time ago now, I know, but he has had a very interesting journey, has had some injuries, transferred over to Arizona State, and had to sit out a year, and definitely struggled with some different things throughout his career, but the kid's a very, very good route runner, and he does a lot of really good things on the field. He's a great slot receiver if you're looking for someone that's just sure-handed, maybe won't, take the top off or do anything remarkable, but is going to get you those 5 yards that you need, is going to be able to be a third down target that is super important. So this is someone that I really, really like. In fact, I think he's someone that kind of reminds me of kind of the Luke McCaffreys of the world, where the athleticism is really, really good. He's from the slot position, is going to be kind of a tactician at the next level, but is a very, very smart kid and can definitely play really good football. Just these next 2 years will be hugely important, and whoever's throwing him the ball at Arizona State will also be hugely important, which is something we'll definitely unpack throughout the season. But another one getting to the defensive side of the ball here is Darrell Jackson Jr. He's someone that didn't get to play a lot last year because of this rule. Came over from, I believe, a very small school, if I'm not mistaken. I can't exactly remember where he came over from, but he's transferred a number of times throughout his career, had to sit out a year, and got to play in the Orange Bowl because that is technically a part of the next year. That doesn't necessarily apply to these rules. So he was able to play in the Orange Bowl, made a couple of tackles, is going to be a very good player for them. And I think when you talk about the Florida State defensive line and what they've done with some remarkable transfers that have come through there, Odell Haggins is one of the best coaches at that position. So I think he's going to be remarkable. I think he's one of those players that maybe it's this season. Maybe he doesn't need the extra season to tack on to his college career to make it happen, because he's going to have to, fill a big void, obviously, with Braden Fisk walking out the door. But also, this kid's just really, really remarkable and can do a lot of really incredible things. So very excited to see what he can do. And then you have Tyler Brown, a very, very talented offensive lineman. This guy came over from Jackson State. He transferred into Jackson State to join Dion when he came over there, and then followed Dion on over to Colorado, but did have to sit last year, and that was a big blow to Colorado. This is probably the guy that they feel the most confident in going into this year on that offensive line. Definitely someone that they are going to build around at left guard. So he's a huge, huge piece of that. And I think when you look at this offensive line, it needs a huge turnaround. And I don't think we have any offensive line turnaround that doesn't have an anchor, that doesn't have a guy that you can go to no matter what and you feel very confident that he's going to block the guy in front of him. I think Tyler Brown is going to be that guy for Colorado. So these next 2 years are going to be huge for him. I think he's going to be a guy that maybe is a huge reason that Colorado starts to take those steps forward that they absolutely need to, especially in the trenches. But then let's finish it out here with Zach Durfee, a very, very talented edge rusher. Was at Sioux Falls for a little bit. Actually went to North Dakota State his freshman year just for a semester, but didn't play football. Decided to then transfer to Sioux Falls, played football, kind of broke out in 2022 when he had 11 sacks for them, and then made his way over to Washington when Kalen DeBoer was still the head coach. He's still there, and he's someone that is very, very talented, definitely someone that could break out in 2024 and might not need that extra year, but definitely someone that when you sit out a year, you probably need a little bit to get your feet wet again, and this is a guy that could absolutely burst onto the scene and be the next, big-time edge rusher out of Washington, just like Braylon Trice this year. So this is obviously a fascinating rule. It's something that is going to be really interesting to watch unfold. Obviously, there are some players that I didn't unpack here that will absolutely benefit from this, but I think when you talk about this rule, I feel like your mind immediately goes to Cam Rising, because he's someone that has struggled from injuries and has had to transfer, and it has done some things that has been a little bit tough. And I think it's one of those things where the talent's there, the ability's there, and he's going to win a lot of football games, but you got to be on the field. And I think if he gets these 2 years under his belt where he's healthy and he leads them to possibly playoff berths, there's going to be NFL teams calling. There's no two ways about that. So, but we're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the most popular guy at the SEC meetings this last week, Jimmy Sexton. And frankly, he's one of the most popular guys in all of the sport because he's one of the most powerful in all of the sport. So we'll break down him and why he is one of the most powerful guys in the sport right after this. So stick with us.